tapaha ogum satyam Om Bhurbhuvasuvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Om Bhurbhuvasuvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Om Tatsavituhu Saviturvarenyam Varenyam Bhargaha Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhimahi Ti Dhimahi Dhiyo Yaha Yonaha Na Prachodayat Prachodayaditi Prachodayat Om Tatsavitu Savitu Tatsavituhu Saviturvarenyam Varenyagum Saviturvarenyam
Hello, good evening, and a very warm welcome to all of you to the Nero Centre this Friday evening. It's lovely to see you all here. I'm going to begin by just inviting the Deputy Director of the Nehru Centre, Sanjay Sharma, who's with us this evening, to come and just greet you all with a few words of welcome. Sanjay.
Very good evening and greetings to all. I am fortunate to have this opportunity to present the welcome address for today's panel discussion on power of your inner voice. Our panel discussion will delve into the profound connections between our innermost selves and the outward journey of our lives, a theme that resonates deeply with seekers of wisdom and purpose across the globe. Today's Sutradhar or thread holder will be Philippa Blackman. She will be in conversation with Sister Jayanti and Smita Joshi. Sister Jayanti is the additional administrative head of the Brahmakumaris, Director of Europe and the Middle East, and CEO of Brahmakumaris, UK. As we all know, the Brahmakumari is the world's largest spiritual organization. Sister Jayanti is a spiritual teacher, a much sought after international public speaker, author, and a visionary leader guided by spiritual values and principles. She has authored over 12 books on meditation and spirituality. Our next expert, Smita Joshi, is a certified yoga teacher and transformation coach. She is the author of Amazon bestseller, The Karma and Diamonds, is a gripping journey of self-discovery across continents and lifetimes, about conquering life's challenges by listening to your inner voice. Smita has had a 25-year business career working internationally with technology giants. She was one of the pioneers in shifting the paradigm of Indian IT, bringing it into the heart of British and European companies. Today's Sutradhar or thread holder, Philippa Blackman, has had a 20-year career with BBC Radio, including local, national, and BBC World Service. She worked as a reporter, presenter, and documentary maker, decorated with several awards for her work, including a Sony Award. She was one of the voices of the flagship program Women's Hour on BBC Radio 4 for over 7 years. She has practiced meditation with the Brahm Kumaris for over 40 years. With this, I conclude my introductory address. I would not take much of your time. I request to our eminent guests to take over the stage for today's program. I thank you all. Please.
Thank you very much indeed, Sanjay, for that introduction. Again, a very warm welcome and many thanks to the Nehru Centre for once again opening its doors to us this evening. We are going to be doing a little bit of photography, so if anyone here would really rather not appear in any photos, it's here Brother Shantanu who's taking the photos, so just have a word with him if you'd rather not appear. So, you obviously all made a really good decision to come and be here this evening, and I wonder whether you were listening to your own inner voice in guiding you to come here. Maybe you had a sense that there was something that you might hear that would be important for the next step on your journey. But what is this thing called the inner voice, and how do we hear it? And I wonder whether in today's world, where we are literally bombarded from the moment we open our eyes till the moment we close them at the end of the day, with messages, with voices trying to sell us things, tell us things, it's almost overwhelmed. Have we lost the ability to have that inner silence and stillness where we can indeed hear that still small voice within? So I'd like to just share with you a very quick story. It's one of my favorite Bible stories from when I was growing up, and it concerns Samuel, who was a 12-year-old boy whose parents had given him to the church, to the temple, to raise him. And in the middle of the night, one night, he heard someone calling his name. And he thought it was his priest, his master. So he went and said, "I heard you calling me, is everything okay?" And his name was Eli, and the master Eli said, "No, I didn't call you. You go back to bed." So he went back to bed. And again, he heard, "Samuel, Samuel." He thought, okay, I really heard it. He went back to Eli and said, "I definitely heard your voice this time." And Eli said, "I can assure you, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." And a third time it happened, "Samuel." And a third time he went to Eli and said, "I'm really hearing you call me." And at this point, Eli realized what was going on. And he said to Samuel, "I think what you're hearing is the voice of the divine. If it happens again, sit up, be very alert, and say, 'Yes, Lord, I am present.' Ji Hazur, Ji Hazar Hazur," whatever the Hindi is, Hazur, Hazi Hazar. So it happened for the fourth time, and Samuel sat up and said, "Yes, Lord, I'm present." And so began a whole communication between Samuel and the Lord. And this story really stayed with me growing up as the possibility that we can get guidance, not just from our own inner selves, but from our higher selves and possibly even from the divine. Well, as you've heard already from the introductions that Sanjay shared with you, I think we are in for a treat tonight. Two very spiritually powerful women who have both mastered the art of listening to their inner voice. You've heard Smita's biography as well. She spans yoga teaching, transformational coaching. She's a TV presenter and content creator, has been in business for 25 years, and has her own YouTube channel, the Self-Discovery Channel. And on this, she has interviewed politicians, entrepreneurs, yoga instructors, gurus, and she does her own guided meditation commentaries, and these appear in places like Insight Timer and Spotify and Apple. And Smita was born in Gujarat, in the same place that Mahatma Gandhi came from, and she came to live in the UK at the age of 10, and she had sort of a profound spiritual experience around the age of 19, 20. And there are similarities there with Sister Genti, who, as you've already heard, is the additional administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris, the largest spiritual organization in the world for both men and women to be led by women. She's also the head of Europe and the Middle East for the Brahma Kumaris. She is the UN representative for Geneva, and the Brahma Kumaris have been affiliated to the UN since 1980 as a non-governmental organization. And Sister Genti really is a visionary, pioneering leader, much sought after as a speaker at conferences on new consciousness, on soul-inspired leadership, and of course climate change conferences since 2009. She's been present at nearly all of them, I think, bar just one. And Sister Genti was born in Pune, and she came to live in London at the age of 8, and she too had a significant spiritual intervention at the age of 19. So there are definitely parallels, and I think we're going to really learn something new and have hopefully a very special evening. So please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Sister Genti and Smita Joshi. Welcome to you both. Please take a seat. It's great to be here all together and to have such an interesting topic to dive into. I wonder if I could begin by asking you both, maybe Smita, begin with you, of how it happened that you first became aware that there was an inner voice that you could connect with and that could almost give you wisdom from another plane, another dimension.
Thank you, Philippa. I just want to start by thanking everybody coming this evening. So appreciative of your time, and we really want to make this special for you. And to have Sister Jayanti with us, such a privilege. Thank you so much for joining, and Philippa. Something happened when I was 7 years old, and in that moment, as a 7-year-old little child, I went to every day and every morning and evening we would sit at the shrine, as we do, in our Indian homes, and do our mantras and our pujas and so on, so morning and evening. And that day I sat down and I had a conversation with God. My conversation with what had happened just now was a very traumatic situation, and shocking, and it was actually, I potentially could have died. I sat there and I said, you don't exist, do you? Because if you did, this wouldn't be happening. Like, you're just made of clay. And in that moment, I had this vision where I saw this great palm. It was a huge palm, like a magic carpet. And it was going like this, and had a little girl in it. And the only words I heard were, you are well taken care of. You have a purpose to serve here. And that was all. But with those words and that vision, it wasn't something I'd imagined. With that was this experience. And the experience was one of tingling, like a light that lit up my spinal column. It was as if like shimmering diamonds had entered and risen again. And I completely felt calm in that moment. So calm that whenever anything else happened in my life since, that experience stayed with me. And I remembered the words, and I remembered the feeling that actually I'm taken care of. Like, we are taken care of. It wasn't just for me, I felt it was for all of us, that we are all taken care of. And that we just need to get outside of that fearful mind and not let what is happening in the moment be the director of what is awaiting and what is possible. So that was when I started to relate to that voice as my inner diamond.
Very nice. And interesting how it was at a time of acute need and potential threat and danger. And I think it's often the case, it's when our back is against the wall that we surrender almost and invite in some intervention. Sister Genti, you grew up in a spiritual family. Your mother and grandmother were both a real influence on you. Do you remember a moment when you became aware that you had your own inner direction and guidance and inner voice that you could connect with?
That awakening happened much later, but there's another parallel with Smita, because when I was 7 and we had our summer holidays in India in April and May, I was with Daddy Janki. Who knew Daddy Janki? Anyone? A few. So Daddy Janki was in a place called Pune, which was my hometown. And I was there with my grandmother and mother and grandfather and great-grandmother actually also. And at that time, I went to children's class with the Brahma Kumaris, and Daddy Janki would be there. And so it was a very lovely, warm family feeling. And then when I was 8, in the month of May, a few weeks later, they had a celebration for my birthday at the center. And so that family feeling just continued. And then we migrated to London some months later. And it would have been many, many years later that I had a spiritual awakening as such. I suppose everybody talks to their conscience, or their conscience talks to them, and you come to several decisions yourself. And so for me it was very interesting that after having been in India for a stretch of time when I was 18, then again I went to Daddy Janki. I'd known her since childhood, and she asked me, because she knew I'd been in India for a few months by then, but I hadn't gone to see her, and she said, "Do you want to say something or shall I say something?" I said, "Daddy, I've come to listen." And the first thing she started talking about was conscience. And here I am, many years later, addressing the subject of the inner voice, the conscience again. So my starting point for the journey was the subject of conscience. And when I heard about this, it awoke something in me, and it was very powerful. And within the space of 6 weeks, I decided that this is to be my life. So when the conscience does awaken, it moves you.
Smita, one of the reasons we're here this evening is to celebrate the success of your trilogy, Karma and Diamonds, and congratulations for that, by the way. The idea being that no matter what your karma that you are born into, the cards that fate has dealt for you, you can turn that into something special and create your own diamonds. What is it about the analogy of the diamond that for you fits so perfectly as a way of understanding the soul and the self?
The experience that I've had with the field, the you can call it Atman, beyond the identity that I am myself, the Jivatman, the one that is landed, the little spark of divinity or consciousness that's landed in this body with all its experiences and so on, is then connected to, you could say it's the ocean of consciousness, whereas we're like the drop. A little drop has landed in here. And that ocean is then connected to the rest of the universe that we call all that is. And so while the two are one and the same, they have slightly different roles to play in relationship to who we are as a human being, as an identity, as a walking, talking, material manifested person. And my experience of it has been that it is a very multifaceted, I suppose, a consciousness, in the sense that when we start to tap into it, I have asked it questions to resolve very, very sticky karmic patterns in my life. And it has guided me down the path that I could never, ever have imagined would hold answers for me. It's taken me into nooks and crannies of the world. It's taken me into previous existences where things were left incomplete and so on. And at the same time, when I was working in corporates, one of my main role was to actually win big business, where we're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds worth of deals and so on. And I found it very hard. I'm very strategic, but I found it very hard to actually to follow my own strategy, because there's something within me that was always like switched on and turned on. It would say, like, call that CEO now, and it would be 8 o'clock in the morning, and he would answer in the bank. So somebody who might be running a bank such as HSBC, let's say, that sort of scale. But I'd call his office, and he would answer the phone, and rather than his secretary, because she hadn't arrived yet. So it would be things like that has me believe that it's a multifaceted, there's a multifaceted element to this consciousness that we can tap into as being people living in the world. And our job really is, and also as a human being, we're so multifaceted, so that diamond element is that knowledge that we can tap into through that consciousness, which can then prism through into however we make ourselves available to it. And we're as good as the questions we are. So anybody who knows about ChatGPT, you're as good as your prompt as to how it will guide you. And it's exactly the same with that field of consciousness. It's that intelligence that we're tapping into. So for me, it's a very multifaceted consciousness and intelligence that we have the access to tapping into. And it's very pure. It just needs us to get out of the way, meaning the mind stuff. It's like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is in the second sutra, he says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And then in the third, he actually tells you what happens if you do Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha means basically the mind is a whirlpool, and yoga takes place as in the union or connection with that higher consciousness. When we allow that whirlpool of the mind stuff to calm down, then we can access that. But when you access that, the third sutra is about what happens is that you become aligned with it. So even your ego and even your identity becomes so seduced by that field of pure awareness that it actually falls in line to just want more of it. And so we then become aligned, integrated, and tapping into that field of pure awareness. So for me, it's a very multifaceted intelligence. And I love to call that a diamond for that reason. There's a purity about it.
Beautiful. And Sister Genti, I know for you as well, the diamond has been used as an image to represent the soul. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Images are a very beautiful way to express subtle truth, and the image is a manifestation, but the actual reality is something else in a sense. But we're using images to convey ideas. And for me, when I come to the awareness of the inner being, I come to the awareness of an infinitesimal point of light. But the light that radiates from this, and it stays here in the center of the forehead, and the light that radiates from this takes on this oval image. So you can say that it's like the flame that surrounds the candle, the point of ignition, but also you can say it's like a diamond with many, many facets, and different facets express different aspects of your personality at different times. But also you can say that at the present time, the diamond has been covered with layers and layers of dust. And so the whole journey of meditation, contemplation, Raj Yoga would be to remove all that dust with the power of the divine love that you can experience through yoga, through connecting with the divine. And that love is able to cleanse the soul so that then the diamond again can shine through.
And that is true of anybody. It's not just two sparkling diamonds like the two of you. It's any individual.
Absolutely, every single
anyone.
individual.
So we're talking here about the power of the inner voice, and I wonder whether you see a difference between the outer and the inner, whether that be the inner voice and our outer voice, or the outer world and our inner world. Is one not just a reflection of the other? Or do you feel that by going within, we are actually accessing something which we can only access on that inward journey. Smita, do you want to take that first?
So the moment we, as such, it's a non-dual. It's a non-dual consciousness. So where the fragmentation comes or the separation comes is so long as we're not aware that it's there. And the moment you become aware of it, it's almost impossible. Like when it impresses its existence on you, like when it comes to you and you allow it, at sometimes like, it happens under stress, like the diamond is formed, under, carbon is formed into a diamond under pressure. And very often that's what happens. There is some element of pressure going on where we have this experience, whether it comes to us or we go to it. But the moment we start to bring the inner and the outer into it, we can be aware of the outer, but we need to be aware of the inner. And the two start to then dance together. It's like one arm, sort of moving so that we have a balance, the legs and arms moving in such a way that we have this balance. So for me, there's definitely this existence on the outside, because it depends on how cerebral you are and how much of the conditioning that we have to bear, to cleanse, as it were, or to let go of. So the veils of Maya do definitely impact how we see it. But in reality, the moment we start to accept that there is so much more, like if I'm only an ocean, I'm only a drop of the ocean, what about the ocean? Like what if I let that in? So it becomes something very, I would say, compulsory, mandatory, to start to understand the ways in which we're not accessing the inner world. So then for me, the two start to move together. And after you guys meditate, you've been meditating for decades. Obviously, Sister Jayanti, you've been so much longer than me. But I don't think it takes that many years of meditation, or self-awareness is probably the main tool that we have to access the two and bring the two into alignment. And they both have a role to play. And we always diss the ego, but we shouldn't diss the ego, because the ego is required to take action in the world. If I were just sitting in my home, in my meditation room, and doing nothing else, it's great, but there's more we can do. So the idea is really to bring the identity to understand how it can become a facilitator and an actor, and a facilitator and an actor and a player in its own play at a higher level. And so we start to bridge the gap between the inner and the outer in that way.
And eventually the inner and the outer become one, and there's no separation. But at this point, Sister Jayanti, what is it that we're accessing when we begin that inward journey? And how is that different from any outward journey?
I'd also just like to say a word of introduction to what I'm going to say, in the sense that the whole philosophy of India, whether you call it the Adi Sanatan, the Dharma, or you call it Hinduism, whatever is comfortable, but it is so vast and broad, and it encompasses within itself many, many different strands and ideas. And I say this because you mentioned the non-duality, and then there's the concept of the dual, the Atma, the soul connecting with Param Atma. So it's a relationship, it's a bond. Paramatma, the Supreme Soul, and Atma, the soul. And so I belong to that part that follows the path of the Dvaita, the duality. And so, but of course, many of the images you were using are things that I would also agree with totally. And so the idea of the inner being, the Atma, the soul, and here's my external identity, and this is the costume. And so the soul is playing its role through this external costume. And of course, that then determines so much of whatever it is I'm doing. But yes, it's true that sometimes we focus only on the external identity. And that's a very, very narrow perspective to see life through. And within that narrow perspective, it's as if I'm focusing only on the self in a negative way. And what I have to do is to come to the eternal consciousness of the inner being, the I, which is the soul itself. And when I connect with the being that I truly am, then in that awareness there's eternity, immortality, spirituality, and there's the purity and the power that the soul has been seeking. And as I come to that inner awareness of who I truly am, and that inner voice is awakening at that moment, then the role that I play through this costume is going to be that much more elevated. And so yes, as you said, when the inner and the outer come together with a higher consciousness, then the role that I play is going to be not just for my own selfish purposes, but it's going to be a contribution to the world. It's going to be of service to humanity. And so it is a journey that you have to go on. Staying on the external level, just the role that I play, I'm defined by relationships, I'm defined by position, by property, possessions, all of these things, which is why I say it's very narrow and limited. But when I come to the awareness of the inner identity, then in that awareness, I'm still doing the same job. I haven't left it. I haven't run off into the jungle or onto the mountaintop. I'm still very much in the world. But now I'm playing that role with the awareness of the eternal being, the eternal I. And you're absolutely right. It's not a question of decades and decades. Because for me, within the first lesson, when I heard that lesson of the inner being, the soul, what is Atma, even that first lesson was so powerful that it changed everything. And so the journey has been a very beautiful one, challenging, but beautiful, because all the time, on the one side, you're dealing with the obstacles that you create for yourself. Sometimes we think obstacles come from outside, but in fact, it's my own limitations and my own weaknesses that create the obstacles for me. And when I stay connected with the inner being, my vision is unlimited. It's not narrow anymore. So from the very limited, I move into the unlimited space.
I like what you said, that it doesn't take years and years of practice to hear this inner voice. It's something that can happen to anybody in the space of a second. But I'd like to really drill into what it is that we're tuning into and what it is that we're hearing. And to my mind, it seems like there are different levels of consciousness. So if we can deal with them one at a time and begin with just what is personal to just me. And when I'm tuning in and I'm getting, a feeling to do something, I feel like I'm being guided from my own intuition, perhaps. I'm wondering about the role of the subconscious mind. And I'm also wondering to what extent does just our stuff, our weaknesses, does that have a voice that sometimes we hear and we need to distinguish between that voice and the voice of the wise part of ourselves? Can you give us any way to navigate that wisdom, that voice that is simply personal to me and my stuff? Smita.
Amazing question, really. And I think it's a fundamental question on the path of, let's call it yoga, because we are looking to align, integrate, and bring together two elements which fundamentally are the same, but they operate in different ways. And so one of the biggest things that I think we need to be aware of, I just want to say, as a slight disclaimer to this conversation, that the rishis have given us very clear instructions that we must remember that on the path of yoga, the deeper you go, the more you will come into siddhis, clairvoyance, clairaudience, a whole bunch of other things, listening to being able to see spirit beings, whatever.
So particular powers.
There are certain things that emerge, and it could be in the art of self-mastery or the path of self-mastery, and it could be making money, it could be anything, right? And one of the things that I discovered very, very young was that I had this explosion at one time of clairvoyance and clairaudience. And it came with this ability to heal. I still have it. But at that time, it was just present. And people could be in my space, or they would come to me with an issue. I might just say something to them, or do something, and it would shift. And people were queuing up outside. I remember being in India one time in Rajkot. There was like people waiting outside, queuing up to come and see me. I was like, no, this is not my path. What happens is these siddhis do emerge, and we have to be very careful that we don't get sidetracked by them, we don't get distracted, because what is the purpose of us as a soul is really to connect to the purity of what is. Of Advaita meaning without a second, that which has no other. It is what it is, you know. So we're looking at doing that. So I just want to say that these things can happen, and we want to be very, very responsible about how we may want to. If it's okay to do all these things and to engage and develop that skill, but as long as you know that you're not to get stuck there. So now coming to the inner voice, the mind has a way, all our conditioning that we have will bring up so much stuff. We are so preconditioned, we don't even know. So one of the analogies you could say is, you know, the sunglass analogy with the filters. If you've got yellow lenses on, you'll see everything as yellow. And it doesn't matter what people, actually, you don't see what's in front of you. And this gives rise to all kinds of ideas, perceptions. The ego wants to know everything. Ego feels it knows everything. So it could be a critical voice, it could be the voice of a parent, it could be however your past has shaped you. So that's something that is very different. In psychology, we talk about that as being the inner voice. In yogic paths, we talk about the inner voice as being the voice of the higher consciousness. And one will stop the other. So we do need to be able to understand our own psychology really well. In order that we don't get tripped up by it, in order that we don't create more of the same from what we've had in the past in our future. The space of possibility is the pure awareness, and that's what we want to tap into. If we want to heal, if we want to find new realities for ourselves, new possibilities that just in the mind as you know it today, your predictable future is not possible. If you want something way outside of that, which is where the karma and diamonds element comes in, the past, we really need to be able to understand it and sometimes get complete with it, and then understand that we have a choice. And the diamonds part of it is what we can create from that other space that we're talking about, the Atman, tapping into its wisdom, into its intelligence. And learning to listen to that is not such a woo-woo concept. It's literally just aligning yourself to availing of your own intelligence. It's just that it's the intelligence that is beyond the conditioned mind, and the physical body with which we have created, you know, which has perhaps a lot of karma, that we're trauma, all kinds of things that we house in it. So it's really important to understand your psychology. It's really important to distinguish how the voice is different. And I'll tell you how it's different. It's very simple. Anytime we're being driven by the known ego or by the identity, there'll be a sense of force. There'll be a sense of never enough. There's always more to want and to have. Whereas when we tap into the voice of the higher being, the higher intelligence, it's always calm. It doesn't shout. It shouted at me once. It only happened to me once, and there was a purpose behind that. But it doesn't actually talk to you in loud voices. It's very subtle. It's a subtle reality, and we need to be able to hear it beyond the noise of our own mind. So the difference is, one is when you hear it, it's so inspiring. It's like almost every time like an epiphany. Having heard it, you can't go back to being the way you were.
Interesting. I'm going to ask you the ways in which you hear it, but Sister Jenti, I'd like to hear you respond to that. How do you differentiate between intuition, guidance, knowing that is coming from within your own being, and when you are receiving something from a higher dimension, be it your higher self or be it the angelic plane that is possibly giving you something that wouldn't have come from you? How do you distinguish?
Can I first also share some ideas that are very similar and some ideas that may be a little bit different? But when I go on that inner journey, the first thing that I notice are my thoughts, and then go a little bit further, and you see your feelings. Go a little bit deeper, and you begin to see your beliefs and your attitudes, and go even deeper, and you begin to see your patterns of behavior. In Hindi we would say sanskaras, but those predispositions that I'm born with, and further that I also generate and create. And so in other language we would say that thoughts and feelings are the conscious mind, connected very much with that. And then there's a word, I'm again going to use the Hindi because I haven't found a proper, adequate translation in one word. But when I talk about attitudes and beliefs, it's actually buddhi. And the best word I can find is intellect, but it doesn't totally convey what the buddhi really is. And I think many of you are either travelers on this path, so you would have come across this term buddhi, and many of you would know Hindi, so you would know this term. And then there's, because you're asking about the subconscious, the unconscious, and so on. So the buddhi is that part which is the subconscious, but I can tap into it and get to know it through silence, through my own inner journey. But then there's the unconscious, which are the sanskaras, which I only get to know gradually. I would say that takes a long time. You don't get to know your unconscious patterns. It was a long journey, and you still sometimes get surprised by what comes out. So that the sanskaras are the unconscious. And meditation is first of all dealing with the mind, and then further on, you see the Gita talks about focusing your mind on the divine, man mana bhav, remember me. So the remembrance is through the mind. But it also talks about buddhi yoga, the connection of the buddhi, your understanding, your belief, your attitude, connecting that with the divine. And then through those connections, what you're doing is actually transforming your own sanskaras. You're uplifting them, those sanskaras, to their own highest state. So that in a way is the anatomy of the soul. And so most times I'm listening to people from outside. Sometimes I'm listening and seeing where my mind is going, and feelings take me in different places. Feelings, emotions, very connected, and so sometimes the power of feelings and emotions is such that it totally overrides what the conscience is saying. And I use the word conscience now for the buddhi. That ability that every soul has to discern between right and wrong. And I know that in today's world, sometimes it's fashionable to think that there's no such thing as right and wrong. But in fact, karma is telling me that whatever are the results that are coming my way are the outcome of my good or not so good deeds. So there is something which is right and wrong. And my buddhi, when it's clear, is able to guide me. And as you said, a very, very soft, gentle voice. When the emotions come, they're not soft. They sometimes come as a sledgehammer. You know, when I get angry, that's not my buddhi, that's my mind, my feelings, my emotions. When I feel jealousy, but also when I feel love in a very passionate way, that's also the emotions. So there's good emotions too. The voice, as you said correctly, the voice of the mind and feelings and emotions is a very strong one. And when I follow that, it's sometimes dangerous. When I allow myself to be calm and quiet and connect with the inner being, then the mind is very much connected with what's going on out here. But the intellect, the buddhi, is what I connect with when I go inside. And then I can hear the voice of my conscience. And one of the problems with this is that if I ignore the voice of conscience, maybe another time it'll speak to me, but the second time I ignore it, it's going to stop speaking to me. And so the conscience falls asleep. Where do you think we are at in this world today along this trajectory? The conscience awake or the conscience asleep? I'll leave you to figure it out. But it's when we see all the tragedies around us and the crazy things that are happening, it makes me feel that the conscience is really heavily gone to sleep, very deep sleep. But of course, at the same time, we are seeing this awakening of interest in meditation and spirituality. So it's like there's a descending force and an ascending force at the same time, at this particular time in history, which is unique. We've never had such a time before when both the negativity is so strong, but also the rise of positivity and spirituality is equally, or maybe I would say even more powerful and strong. You know, think about all the forces that prevented you or tried to prevent you from coming here tonight. And that immediately tells you how powerful those forces are. But you're here. And so the inner voice was telling you to come, so it turned out to be stronger. But it's a minority for whom this applies. It's not a majority. So one level is where I'm just listening to my feelings and emotions. The other level is where I let my mind become calm and quiet so that I can start listening to what my inner voice is actually telling me. And so that's the state that I would say is where you're listening to your inner voice, where you're